The Kansas sun climbed over the horizon like a ball of fire, casting long shadows across Tom Brennan's failing farm. It was barely 6 in the morning, but the July heat already pressed down on the dry earth like a heavy blanket. Dust devils danced across the fields, swirling through broken fence posts and overgrown weeds that Tom no longer had the money to maintain. He stood on the sagging front porch of the old farmhouse, coffee mug trembling slightly in his calloused hands. The envelope from First National Bank sat on the weathered wooden railing, its red stamp screaming at him even without looking. Final notice: 60 days to pay $87,000 or lose everything. 3 generations of Brennan blood had soaked into this Kansas soil. His grandfather Samuel had bought this land in 1947 with money saved from years of backbreaking work. Built the farmhouse board by board, raised cattle through droughts and floods, created something solid, something lasting. And now Tom, at 52 years old, was about to be the Brennan who lost it all. He drained the last of his bitter coffee and stepped off the porch, boots crunching on the gravel path. The morning air smelled of dry grass and distant rain that never seemed to come anymore. His small herd of 15 cattle grazed lazily near the water tank, their movements slow and peaceful in the growing heat. All except one. Red stood alone in the east pasture, nearly 400 yards away, his massive rust-colored body completely motionless. His head was lowered, his front hooves planted firmly in the dirt. Even from this distance, Tom could see the bull's muscles tense and release, as he pawed at the ground with single-minded determination. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Tom muttered, setting his mug on a fence post and grabbing his worn Stetson hat. This had been going on for 3 days now. Every morning, same time, same spot. Red would separate himself from the herd and stand in that exact location, digging at the earth like something beneath it was calling to him. Tom had checked for gopher holes, prairie dog burrows, even wondered if a snake had made a nest there. Nothing explained the bull's obsession. Tom climbed over the split-rail fence, feeling the old wood creak under his weight. The walk across the pasture seemed longer than usual, his worn boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Grasshoppers jumped out of his path, their wings clicking in the stillness. As he approached, Red lifted his massive head and turned those intelligent brown eyes toward him. The bull snorted once, a deep rumbling sound that vibrated through his chest, then immediately returned to his work. His front right hoof struck the ground again and again, methodical and determined. Dirt flew backward in small arcs, creating a growing pile behind him. "Easy there, big guy," Tom said softly, reaching out to touch the bull's muscular shoulder. The hide was warm beneath his palm, slick with early morning sweat. Red had always been gentle, almost docile despite his size. Tom had raised him from a calf 6 years ago, bottle-fed him when his mother rejected him, spent countless hours training him for breeding. Red was worth more than any other animal on the farm, a prize Hereford bull with championship bloodlines. Selling him would have bought Tom another 6 months, maybe a year. But he couldn't do it. Red was family. But something had changed in the bull's behavior. His eyes held a focus Tom had never seen before, almost frantic, as if he understood something that Tom couldn't. Tom knelt down in the disturbed earth, running his weathered hand through the loose soil. It felt different here, denser somehow, more compact than the surrounding ground. Like something beneath had settled and compressed over many years, creating a subtle depression that only an animal's instinct could detect. He grabbed a handful of dirt and let it sift slowly through his fingers, watching the particles catch the early morning light. That's when he saw it. A tiny glint of metal, barely visible beneath the disturbed earth. Not silver, not gold. Rust-colored, oxidized, ancient. Tom's heart skipped a beat. He set his hat aside and began digging with both hands, carefully pushing aside layers of dry Kansas soil. Red watched him intently now, no longer pawing, just standing perfectly still, as if his job was done, and now it was Tom's turn to finish it. 5 minutes of digging exposed more of the object. It wasn't a horseshoe or a piece of old farm equipment. It was cylindrical, smooth, deliberately shaped. Tom's fingers traced its curve, feeling the cold metal beneath decades of earth. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. He stood up slowly, his knees protesting, and stared down at the partially exposed object. His mind raced through possibilities. This land had been in his family for 78 years. His grandfather had bought it from a widow whose husband had farmed wheat here in the 20s and 30s. Before that, it was prairie, open range, Native American hunting grounds going back centuries. No one had ever mentioned anything buried here. No family stories, no old legends. Nothing. Tom pulled his cell phone from his pocket with dirt-covered hands and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he needed. Marcus Taylor, his oldest friend, the only person in this town who'd never judged him for his failures. The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Tom, it's 6:30 in the morning. What's wrong?" "Marcus," Tom said, his voice tight with something between fear and excitement. "I need you to come out to the farm, right now." "What happened? Is it the bank? Did they—" "No, it's not that." Tom looked down at the exposed metal, then at Red, who stood like a statue in the golden morning light. "I think my bull just found something that's been buried here for a very long time. And Marcus, I don't know what it is, but I got a feeling it's important." The line went silent for a long moment. Tom could hear his friend's breathing, could almost see him sitting up in bed, running his hand over his face. "I'm on my way," Marcus said finally. "Don't touch anything else until I get there." "Too late for that." "Then don't touch anything more. I'll be there in 30 minutes. The call ended. Tom stood alone in the east pasture, the July sun climbing higher, the temperature already pushing toward 90 degrees. Red snorted once more, a sound that seemed almost satisfied, then turned and began walking slowly back toward the barn, his work finally complete. Tom stared at the mysterious metal cylinder that his bull had refused to let stay buried. Whatever it was, whoever had put it here, they'd wanted it hidden. They'd wanted it forgotten. But Red had other plans. And now, so did Tom. Marcus Taylor's battered Ford pickup truck appeared on the horizon 35 minutes later, trailing a cloud of dust down the long gravel driveway. Tom stood waiting in the east pasture, his shirt plastered to his back with sweat, dirt caked under his fingernails and streaked across his forearms. The morning sun had climbed higher now, and the temperature was pushing past 90 degrees, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and warp above the parched earth. Marcus climbed out of his truck slowly, moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose back had given him trouble for the past decade. At 62, he was 10 years older than Tom, his face weathered like old leather from a lifetime working construction in the Kansas sun. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and right now they were filled with concern as he grabbed a toolbox from the truck bed and started walking toward his friend. "You sounded half crazy on the phone," Marcus called out as he climbed over the fence, grunting with the effort. "This better be good, Brennan." "You tell me," Tom said, gesturing toward the hole he dug. Marcus approached cautiously, as if expecting a snake to emerge from the disturbed earth. He knelt down with another grunt, his knees popping audibly, and stared at the partially exposed metal cylinder. His expression changed immediately from skepticism to fascination. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, reaching out to touch the rusted surface. His fingers traced the curve of the metal, testing its solidity. "This isn't some piece of old farm equipment. Look at the seal on this end. Someone built this thing to last." "That's what I thought," Tom said, squatting beside him. "You think it's a pipe? Some kind of old irrigation system?" Marcus shook his head slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration. "No way. Pipes don't have sealed ends like this. And look at this rust pattern, Tom. See how it's uniform? Oxidized all the way through? This thing's been down here for decades. 30, 40 years minimum, maybe more." A chill ran down Tom's spine despite the heat. "My grandfather bought this land in 1947. That's 78 years ago. You think he put this here?" "Did Samuel ever mention anything like this? Any family stories about buried treasure or time capsules?" Tom stood up, wiping sweat from his face with his forearm. "He died when I was 12. Heart attack in the South Field. Dropped dead while checking fence posts. I remember he was a quiet man, kept to himself mostly. Never talked much about the past." He paused, staring down at the cylinder. "But my dad used to say Grandpa had secrets. Used to disappear for days sometimes, back in the 50s and 60s. Dad never knew where he went. Marcus pulled a small folding shovel from his toolbox and began carefully excavating around the cylinder, working with the precision of an archaeologist. Well, maybe we're about to find out what those secrets were. The Kansas wind picked up, hot and dry, carrying the scent of sun-baked earth and distant wheat fields. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp and lonely. Tom glanced back toward the barn and saw Red standing in the shadows of the open doorway, watching them with what seemed like patient expectation. 20 minutes of careful digging later, they'd freed the entire cylinder from its earthen tomb. Marcus was right about the age. The metal was heavily oxidized, the original color impossible to determine beneath layers of rust. But the seal at one end was intact, covered with what looked like hardened tar or wax that had protected it from moisture and decay. "This thing weighs at least 40 pounds, Marcus grunted as they lifted it together. "Whatever's inside is substantial." "Should we open it here?" Tom asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Marcus straightened up, brushing dirt from his jeans, and gave Tom a long, measured look. "No. If there's something valuable in here, documents or artifacts or God knows what, we do this right. Inside, clean environment, maybe even film it. You never know what you might need to prove later." Tom wanted to argue, wanted to tear the seal off right there in the field, but he knew Marcus was right. His friend had always been the cautious one, the planner, while Tom acted on impulse. It's why they'd balanced each other out for 50 years of friendship. Together they carried the cylinder across the pasture, their boots crunching on dried grass. Red emerged from the barn as they passed, following them at a distance like a faithful dog, his massive hooves thudding softly on the hard-packed earth. Tom glanced back at the bull and could swear there was satisfaction in those brown eyes. Inside the farmhouse, the air conditioning provided blessed relief from the heat, though Tom knew he'd pay for running it when the electric bill came. He'd been trying to conserve every penny, but this was too important. They cleared the old kitchen table, spreading newspapers across its scarred wooden surface, and carefully set the cylinder down. Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm documenting this," he said, starting a video recording. "Date is July 18th, 2025. Location is the Brennan Farm, East Pasture. Tom Brennan and Marcus Taylor are about to open a sealed metal cylinder discovered approximately 3 feet below ground by Tom's bull Red." "You sound like a TV detective," Tom said, managing a nervous smile. "Just being thorough." Marcus set the phone against a coffee mug to keep it steady, then pulled a flathead screwdriver from his toolbox. "Let's see what we've got." He began working on the seal, carefully chipping away the hardened wax. It came off in chunks, some pieces so old they crumbled to powder at his touch. Beneath the wax, they could see threads like a giant screw cap. The smell that rose from the opened cylinder filled the kitchen. Old paper, aged leather, and the weight of decades. Marcus carefully tilted it, and the contents slid onto the newspaper-covered table. A leather-bound journal came first, its cover cracked and dark brown. Then letters bound with faded string, black and white photographs with curled edges, and finally a folded document covered in official stamps. Tom's hands trembled as he reached for the journal. The leather felt fragile, ready to crumble. He opened it carefully to the first page. The truth must be told. He turned to the next page and read aloud, his voice shaking. January 14th, 1952. My name is Samuel Brennan. If you're reading this, the truth I kept hidden must finally be told. This farm was more than cattle and wheat. It was a sanctuary, a safe house where those fleeing hatred could find peace before moving north. Tom looked up at Marcus, his throat tight. That's my grandfather. Keep reading, Marcus urged. Tom turned to the next entry, dated March 3rd, 1952. Another family arrived last night. The Washingtons, mother, father, 3 children. They came from Mississippi, terrified and starving. Mrs. Washington's hands bled from field work. Their home had been burned. We hid them in the cellar for 5 days until the route north was clear. Tom set the journal down. A cellar? I've lived here my whole life. There's no cellar. Marcus's eyes widened. The barn. That back section your grandfather never let us near as kids. He said it was dangerous, unstable. They looked at each other, then bolted for the door. Red stood near the barn entrance, watching them approach. Inside, dust floated through shafts of sunlight. They moved past the stalls toward the forbidden back section, where old equipment had gathered rust for decades. "Help me move this," Tom said, grabbing an ancient plow. They dragged equipment aside: sawhorses, plywood sheets, coils of rope. 10 minutes of work revealed wooden floorboards that didn't match the rest. Tom knelt and brushed away decades of dust, revealing a rectangular seam. "It's a trap door," Marcus whispered. Tom worked his pocket knife into the crack. The wood groaned, then suddenly lifted with a sharp crack. They pulled together, and the door opened with screaming hinges, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. Cool air rushed up, carrying the smell of earth and secrets. Marcus clicked on his flashlight. The beam showed rough stone walls and steps carved from bedrock. They descended carefully, counting 12 steps before reaching a dirt floor. Marcus swept his light around the small cellar, 10 by 12 feet with low ceilings and stone walls. Then they saw them. Names carved into the stone. Dozens of them. Washington family. March 1952. Tom touched the letters. "From the journal," he whispered. They read more names. The Johnson family, July 1953, Marion James Tucker, September 1954. The Williams family, August 1952, Robert and Clara Davis, November 1953. 43, Tom counted. 43 families. In the corner sat a metal box. Tom opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, families in the barn, children smiling despite their fear. All African American. All saved. Beneath the photos lay letters. Tom pulled one out and read by flashlight. "Dear Mr. Brennan, you saved my family in 1953. I was 7 years old. I just graduated from Howard University. I'm going to be a doctor. My father opened a business in Chicago. My sister's a teacher. None of this would be possible without you. You risked everything. Thank you. Marcus Washington, Jr., 1968. Tom looked up at Marcus, tears streaming. "Your name." Marcus stood frozen, his flashlight shaking. "My father was Marcus Washington. He changed our name to Taylor in Chicago. Said it was safer." His voice broke. "He told us stories about good people who helped us escape Mississippi, but he never gave names. Just said we'd met an angel." Marcus sank to the floor, holding the letter his father had written to Samuel Brennan 70 years ago. Around them, 43 names carved in stone bore witness to courage that had stayed hidden for decades. Tom sat beside his oldest friend in that underground chamber, both men surrounded by the weight of a secret that demanded to be told. Red's bellow echoed faintly from above, as if the bull knew their discovery was only the beginning. The past had finally broken through the earth, and nothing would ever be the same. By the next morning, Tom had made his decision. He sat at his kitchen table with his phone, the journal open in front of him, and started making calls. First, he called the Wichita Eagle newspaper, then the Kansas Historical Society, then a professor at the University of Kansas who specialized in civil rights history. With each call, his voice grew stronger, more determined. "My grandfather saved 43 families during segregation," he told them. "I have proof. Letters, photographs, a journal, and I want people to know." By noon, a reporter named Jessica Mills was standing in his kitchen, a camera crew behind her. She was young, maybe 30, with sharp eyes that widened as she examined the journal. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice trembling with excitement, "do you understand what you found? This is living history. Documentation of a network historians always suspected existed, but could never prove." The story aired that evening on the 6 o'clock news. Tom watched himself on screen, standing in his barn, explaining what his grandfather had done. The camera showed the cellar, the names carved in stone, the letters of gratitude. Within an hour, the story went viral. Tom's phone exploded with calls and messages. National news networks wanted interviews. Social media posts multiplied by the thousands. Historians from across the country reached out, begging to study the documents. But not everyone was celebrating. The first angry call came at 7:30 that night. Tom didn't recognize the number. "You're making this town look bad," a man's voice growled. "Dragging up old history, making us all sound like racists." "I'm telling the truth about one brave man," Tom replied evenly. "Your grandfather was a criminal. He broke the law. He broke evil laws to save innocent people." The caller hung up, but more calls followed, some supportive, many hostile. By 10 o'clock, Tom had stopped answering. Marcus arrived early the next morning, his face grim. "I've been getting calls, too. Some people are saying we're stirring up trouble, dividing the community." "We're revealing history," Tom said firmly. "Not everyone sees it that way." That Sunday, Tom attended First Baptist Church like he had every week for 50 years. But everything felt different. Whispers followed him down the aisle. Some people smiled warmly and shook his hand, thanking him for honoring his grandfather's courage. Others turned away, their faces hard with disapproval. After the service, Reverend Paula Jennings approached him. She was 73, one of only a dozen black residents in their predominantly white town of 200 people. "Tom," she said softly, taking his hand in both of hers. "My grandmother used to tell stories about a white farmer who helped people escape. She called him an angel. I never knew if it was true." Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you for proving it was real." But the moment of peace shattered when Dale Hutchinson approached with 3 other men. Dale owned the neighboring farm and had always been cool toward Tom. "This ends now, Brennan," Dale said loudly, drawing attention from the departing congregation. "You're dragging this town's name through the mud." "I'm honoring a hero," Tom replied calmly. "Your grandfather was a criminal who broke segregation laws," another man spat. "Laws that were evil," Marcus interjected, stepping beside Tom. "Nobody asked you, Taylor," Dale sneered. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns all of us," Reverend Jennings said firmly, moving to stand with Tom and Marcus. "This is our history, our truth, and it deserves to be told." The crowd began to physically divide. Supporters moved to one side of the church parking lot, opponents to the other. Voices rose. Accusations flew. The peaceful Sunday morning had turned ugly. Tom felt the weight crushing him, the foreclosure notice, the farm failing, and now his community tearing itself apart over his grandfather's secret. That night, alone in his kitchen, he stared at the journal. Had he made a mistake? Should he have just reburied the cylinder and stayed quiet? His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Brennan, my name is Dr. Elijah Washington. I'm a professor at Northwestern University. I believe your grandfather saved my grandfather's life in 1953. Please call me immediately. There's something important you need to know." Tom's hands shook as he dialed the number. The voice that answered was warm, educated, filled with emotion. "Mr. Brennan, I've been searching for proof of my family's story for 20 years, Dr. Washington said, and you just gave it to me. But there's more, so much more than you realize." "What do you mean?" Tom asked. "Your grandfather didn't work alone. There was a network, dozens of safe houses across Kansas and Missouri, and I've found descendants of many families who passed through. They deserve to know what happened. They deserve to say thank you." Tom's heart raced. How many descendants? From the 43 families? Hundreds, maybe thousands by now. And Mr. Brennan, they want to meet you. They want to see the place where their ancestors found safety. Tom looked out his window at the dark Kansas fields, at the land his grandfather had used to save lives. The land he was about to lose. "When?" he asked quietly. "Give me 2 months to organize it. We'll bring them all here, every descendant we can find. A reunion on your land." Tom closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "My farm's being foreclosed in 60 days. Dr. Washington was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mr. Brennan, you saved our history. Now let us save your farm." 2 months later, on a crisp September morning, Tom stood in his driveway watching cars arrive. They came from everywhere: Illinois, Michigan, New York, California, Texas. License plates from 23 different states lined his gravel road. Dr. Elijah Washington had kept his promise. Families poured onto the land, strangers united by shared history. Children ran through the fields where their great-grandparents had once hidden in fear. Elderly men and women wept as they touched the barn walls, the same wood their parents had pressed against 70 years ago. Tom felt overwhelmed, standing in the middle of it all. Marcus stood beside him, both men silent as they watched history come alive. "There must be 300 people here," Marcus whispered. 347, Dr. Elijah Washington said, appearing beside them. He was tall, in his early 60s, with kind eyes and graying hair. "And every single one is connected to the 43 families your grandfather saved." He extended his hand to Tom. "I'm Elijah. My grandfather was part of the Washington family, the first entry in your grandfather's journal." Tom shook his hand, too emotional to speak. "Come," Elijah said gently. "There's someone you need to meet." He led Tom through the crowd to a small woman in her 80s, sitting in a folding chair near the barn. She wore a purple dress and a wide-brimmed hat, her face lined with age but her eyes sharp and bright. "Tom Brennan," Elijah said. "This is Ruth Johnson. She was 5 years old when your grandfather hid her family in 1952. Ruth looked up at Tom, and tears immediately filled her eyes. She reached out with trembling hands, and Tom knelt down, taking them in his own. "I remember him," she said softly, her voice breaking. "Your grandfather. I remember his face. He gave me a piece of candy and told me everything would be okay." She touched Tom's cheek. "You look just like him." Tom couldn't hold back his tears. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for remembering." "How could I forget?" Ruth whispered. "He saved my life." At noon, Reverend Paula Jennings led a prayer service in the East Pasture, right where Red had dug up the truth. Hundreds of people gathered in a circle, holding hands across generations and races, singing hymns that echoed across the Kansas plains. Tom stood with Marcus, both men overwhelmed by the moment. Red watched from nearby, the massive bull standing perfectly still, as if he understood the significance of what he'd started. After the service, Elijah approached Tom with an envelope. His expression was serious, but warm. "This is from all of us," he said. "The 43 families pooled our resources. It's enough to pay your bank loan, repair the farmhouse, and keep this land operating." Tom's hands shook as he opened the envelope. Inside was a certified check for $150,000. "I can't accept this," he said, his voice breaking. "You can, and you will," Elijah replied firmly. "Because this land is sacred. It saved our ancestors. Now, we're saving it. This place needs to stand forever as a reminder of what one brave man did when the world turned its back on justice." Tom looked at Marcus, who nodded through his own tears. "There's more," Elijah continued. "We're establishing the Samuel Brennan Foundation. This farm will become a historical site. Schools will bring students here to learn. The story will be preserved for generations." Tom couldn't speak. He simply pulled Elijah into a hug as tears streamed down both their faces. That evening, as the sun set over the fields, families gathered around a bonfire. Stories were told, names were remembered, and the land that had once hidden desperate souls now celebrated their survival. An elderly man stood to speak. His name was James Tucker, son of the Tuckers who'd been saved in 1954. "My father worked 3 jobs in Chicago to build a life for us," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet crowd. "Before he died, he told me about the white farmer in Kansas who risked everything. He said, 'Never forget that in the darkest times, there are still people who choose light.' I never forgot, and now, standing here, I finally understand what he meant." Tom sat beside the fire, surrounded by the living legacy of his grandfather's courage. Children played in the fields. Adults shared photographs and documents they'd brought. Laughter mixed with tears, creating a symphony of healing that had been 70 years in the making. Marcus nudged him. "Your grandfather would be proud." "He would have said he was just doing what was right," Tom replied. "That's what makes him a hero." As darkness fell completely, Tom walked alone to the East Pasture. Red stood there waiting, his massive form silhouetted against the stars. Tom pressed his forehead against the bull's warm hide. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not letting this stay buried." Red snorted softly, then turned his gaze toward the barn where light spilled from the open doors, where descendants of the saved were carving their own names beside their ancestors on the cellar walls. Not in hiding this time, but in triumph. 3 months later, a historical marker was erected at the farm's entrance. The Brennan Safe House, 1952-1963. Here, Samuel Brennan provided sanctuary to 43 families fleeing racial violence during segregation. His courage saved hundreds of lives and reminds us that one person's compassion can change the world. This land stands as a testament to bravery, humanity, and the power of doing what is right when no one is watching. Tom stood before it with Marcus, Dr. Washington, Ruth Johnson, and dozens of descendants. News cameras recorded the unveiling. The governor of Kansas gave a speech, but Tom barely heard any of it. He was thinking about his grandfather, about a quiet farmer who'd asked for no recognition, who'd simply seen suffering and refused to look away. The farm was saved, the story was told, and Samuel Brennan's legacy would live forever. As the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Red bellowed once, a deep, triumphant sound that echoed across the Kansas plains, carrying with it the voices of 43 families who had found freedom and one bull who'd refused to let courage stay buried. If this story touched your heart, remember that real heroes walk among us every day. They don't seek glory or recognition. They simply see injustice and choose to act. Share this story, honor those who came before us, and never forget that one person's courage can ripple through generations. The ground beneath our feet holds more than dirt. It holds truth, sacrifice, and the unbreakable spirit of humanity at its finest. Bull keeps digging the same spot, then farmer realizes what's buried there.